We have a change to the agenda. I want to let people know we have a revised agenda. On tonight's agenda will be our minutes as always, and then a presentation on the Route 30 corridor by Delaware Valley Planning Commission. I'm sorry, Delaware Regional Planning Commission. Then we have a 3032 Garrett Avenue subdivision. And then we're going to be looking at an amendment to the zoning code, chapter 247 of the stormwater management. If there's anyone who was interested in the 145 King of Prussia Road sketch plan that we had thought we'd be looking at, that's been continued till next month. Thank you. Did the board members have a chance to look at the minutes? Any discussion?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. First on our agenda, I'd like to introduce Rich Bickle from the Delaware Regional Planning Commission. Did it change its name from Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission?
No, it is Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Richard Bickle. I'm Director of Planning at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. And we're here tonight to present the Route 30 Traffic and Circulation Study. And this study follows a longer corridor study that was done in 2011. And that study looked at a corridor along Route 30 from the Overbrook neighborhood of Philadelphia to the Chester County line, passing through Lower Merion and Radnor. And as follow-ups to that study, we did a parallel corridor, a portion of Haverford Road in Haverford Township, and now this study is the third in that general vicinity. And the main thing I want to emphasize tonight is that it was developed in 2012 as part of our work program, and it does not include what I call the Wyeth property. And it was based on assumptions and recommendations of Delaware County planning staff that were present at that time. And so, as I said last week at the Board of Commissioners meeting, it's a snapshot. It's not a moving picture. We haven't caught up with the changes that have been occurring with the Villanova plan and with the development of the Wyeth property. So I just want to get that on the record so that you're clear about it and so that the public is clear about it. For those of you who may not be familiar with DVRPC, we're the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for the greater Philadelphia region, and we have responsibility of preparing a long-range plan. Our current plan goes out to the year 2040. It's called Connections 2040. We prepare a capital program of transportation improvements. Unless your project appears on our capital program, it can't qualify for federal funds. And we also undertake an air quality conformity analysis of the plan and the capital program because the Philadelphia region is in non-attainment for ozone and particulate matter. So we must show that our plans and our capital program do not worsen air quality. We maintain a work program every year that has study ideas developed by our member governments and operating agencies like SEPTA and PennDOT. And so this study came from that work program process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Keith Hartington, who will make the presentation. And we have a video which accompanies the presentation, which shows the actual traffic movements in this portion of Route 30. So it's not just tables that you'll look at. You get to see how the travel simulation model shows how that traffic flows around.
All right, good evening. Like Rich mentioned, my name is Keith Hartington. I'm a transportation planner at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. And it seems like I was just here. So if you're seeing this for the second and possibly the third time, I apologize. Okay, so as Rich mentioned, this study came out of a prior study conducted by the DVRPC a few years ago entitled US 30 Corridor Study, Creating Linkages and Connecting Communities. And that particular study was a larger corridor study from about 69th Street in Philadelphia all the way out past the Blue Route, looking at Route 30. And that particular study identified some corridor issues and concerns that were relevant to this area. And particularly, there was a high number of pedestrian activity and crossings in the area, traffic congestion, and as well as the new Villanova proposed development plan. So it was recommended by Delaware County that we take a closer look at this particular area to examine some of these concerns and issues that were identified from the previous study. So generally speaking, our study area extends from the Blue Route, just east of the Blue Route, to just east of Ithan Avenue. And it's the primary two-way route through Radnor Township, a 4-lane cross-section providing access to I-476 and Villanova University. And it also has a regional rail and transit component where there are two high-speed Norristown line stops as well as a regional rail stop just adjacent to Villanova University. So here's the study area graphically shown. Here's the Blue Route on the left-hand side of the slide here, on the abutting the eastern edge of the the western edge of the study area, which begins just at this area here, just near the interchange for 476, and continues down to Ithan Avenue, which is located at this area. As you can see, Villanova University's main part of the campus is on the north side of the study area, and the large parking lot here on the south side. There's also the Villanova Station 100 line stop, as well as a stadium stop, and then the Villanova Station for the regional rail line. So for this particular project, our emphasis was broken into two areas, a pedestrian aspect and a traffic operations aspect. And for the pedestrian study, there were two components for that. We looked at volumes, just the sheer number of pedestrian crossing Route 30 and pedestrian activity in the area. And then we also did a circulation study on Villanova's campus to give us some idea of the way that once they crossed Route 30, the way that the trips were distributed through the campus. And for the traffic operations, we did an extensive data collection, which I'll get into more detail in just a couple minutes. And with that the data collection, we were able to build the SIM models for the 2012 base year or existing conditions, a 2035 no build, and then 2 build scenarios, which I'll also get into more detail as well. And from that, with our VISM networks, we examined an AM and PM peak hour and collected performance measures for those hours of interest. So in terms of pedestrian activity, we wanted to gauge an idea of just how significant that the pedestrian activity was in the crossing Route 30. So we had counts taken in January of 2013. We had our pedestrian counters out there for 7 days. And we took counts at Church Walk and at Ithan Avenue, crossing Route 30. And the summary table below shows the total number of pedestrians crossing at Church Walk and Ithan Avenue. The northbound trips reflect pedestrians entering Villanova University, while the southbound trips reflect pedestrians exiting or crossing southbound on Route 30. So combined, we have about 9,700 pedestrian trips for the day. Well, we thought there was a high pedestrian activity, and our numbers show that it is significant. So we also did a data collection effort involving the Bluetooth devices, which are essentially devices that we put out in the field and were able to track MAC addresses of tablets and cell phones and so on. So what we did was we set up a particular program.
Wait, could you explain that again?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I'll get into it here. So the blue dots on the map here, there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. What those represent are blue-toed devices. And what that does, they have a particular radius of about 150 feet, which are the circles represented there. And when someone walks near or adjacent or within that 150-foot radius with a Bluetooth-enabled device, such as a cell phone or a PDA or some type of device, that it's actually time-stamped of when that unique ID or MAC address was recorded. And so if someone's crossing, say, for example, at Church Walk, their Bluetooth device would be sort of enacted at this particular location given a particular time. And from that, we set up the origins at Church Walk and an origin at Ithan Avenue, and had all the other circles reflect destinations. So if a particular person crosses here, their ID, their MAC ID is identified at this location, and then they continue on and end up here, that there will be 2 timestamps for one particular MAC address. So from that, we were able to build a distribution of trips within, or circulation within Villanova's campus. So as I stated just a minute ago, the Church Walk served as an origin, and Ithan Avenue served as an origin, and all of the rest of the dots served as a destination. And what this does is it paints a picture of where the students are going, or whoever pedestrians are going once they cross Route 30. And you can see here from Church Walk, the highest destination is over in this neck of the woods, Tollentine Hall, with more than half of the trips starting here and ending here. And there are more details. If a trip wasn't recorded within 15 minutes, it was canceled out. Like if someone, crossed here and was time-stamped here and then went inside the church for half an hour, then their trip was negated. It was a 15-minute a period where it would essentially not be recorded.
Now, is this a Bluetooth device that has to have actually been using the Bluetooth?
Yeah, someone would actually have to have a Bluetooth-enabled device. So not only do you have to have like a cell phone or something, but you also have to make sure that the Bluetooth is on. The Bluetooth is actually on. So that's the only way that it can record that. But from that, we're just getting a sample. And then from the sample, factored to the number of crossings that we did, then we were able to build a distribution from that.
Do you have any idea the percentage of students who have, were recorded?
Yeah, I think it was about 14–15%. Yeah, it was pretty high. Well, I guess it's relevant, but we felt that was a strong enough sample size to build our distribution and get some accurate data from that.
What percentage of, I'm sure you have no idea, of devices that are, how many devices are Bluetooth capable that are turned on?
Well, cell phones, iPads, those type of devices. Any type of like iPad device.
We're fascinated by the new technology, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
Go back to what you're doing.
Okay. So anyway, that gave us a picture. So what this data told us, essentially, is that trips crossing Route 30 at both Church Walk and Ithan Avenue, the destination is oriented to the western side of the campus. Just the sheer numbers reveal that. So that was just an interesting factoid, and we wanted to get some information, which we did, and Villanova, it kind of confirmed what Villanova thought about how people move, pedestrian activity moves through their campus. Okay, for the traffic operations side, again, we did an extensive data collection effort. We collected manual turning movement counts at 4 signalized intersections as well as 2 unsignalized intersections. We had counts from Frank Tavani and Associates. He shared with us some of his counts that he had done. And we also had ATR counts, which are tube counts or reflect traffic counts that are mid-block between the intersections. And all of those, the data collection efforts help to build, for calibration purposes and smoothing purposes, a picture of the traffic flow through our network. So for this particular study, we utilized the VISIM software. And with this tool, it's simply a function that you see here of links and connectors, but there's a lot of driver and vehicle parameters that you can put into this software, including signal timing and phases, which we got from PennDOT, all the stop signs, yield points, and volumes, and so on, to reflect essentially real-world conditions.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
The data collection, the only data that you have other than the ADT is the Tabani information?
No, we did DVR.
Or you did your own counts
Yes,
as well?
yes,
You did
yes.
your own traffic movement counts and everything?
Right, we did.
So that's just supplemental?
Yeah, his work was supplemental to ours.
Okay,
So
great.
his kind of took us above and beyond actually the scope of work that we looked at, but it's always good to have additional
So
counts.
the intersections were done by you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Maybe it's coming up this is actually one of the few people it's first time to see this. Are any of these intersections right now managed at all by camera sensors that increase or decrease the time for lights?
Their vehicle detection is in the ground. That's how they have loop detectors in the ground, not necessarily the video. Well, and in the traffic, at some of the intersections that you see, what you see isn't really a camera. It's more of just a vehicle detection device. And they tend to be more accurate than the loop detectors in the ground, which simply detect metal. But for the intersections along Route 30 in our study, according to the signal plans, they are in-ground detectors.
And do those in-ground detectors change the timing of the lights?
They can, yes, as far as recall. Vehicle detection, it can extend the green time if there's continued demand. It can cut it short, or like on, and I'll show you an example later. But at the 6-point intersection at Kenilworth, if there's no vehicle that comes to that approach, then that vehicle phase for that particular cycle can be skipped, and then the time can be allocated to other phases. That typically happens outside the peak hour, but it does happen.
I have a quick question for
Yes.
you. Are these studies going to be used to be able to retime lights as traffic changes with the new construction of the different properties that we've been looking at?
Well, yes and no. The sim itself does not do signal optimization. It's not an optimization tool. However, when I'll take you through our build scenarios in our future networks, I took the liberty to adjust the signal timing accordingly because the demand at the approaches changes. And what I can do with the FISIM is I can set a particular signal timing on all the phases, run the simulation and get performance measures out of it, delay and queue lengths and so on. And if I see it's a balancing act, so where I can continue to adjust the signal until I have not necessarily optimized conditions, but conditions where it's as favorable from a judgment perspective as I could get.
So do you then reevaluate this after some of these construction projects occur to see what the traffic is doing, or do you think you've predicted it well enough here that you don't have to
This
do it
is
again?
just, I would recommend having, after any particular improvement, a significant improvement in the area, that the signals would be retimed. And that would probably be either from a separate study or through PennDOT.
Okay, we're all going to use our best self-discipline to not interrupt and ask questions because we're going to have a million questions at the end. So I did say to Keith earlier, we're going to try to go through the project. So let's.
I don't mind. So
Thank you.
it's okay. Okay. So for our particular networks, I mentioned before, for our base year through our data collection efforts and our turn movement counts and so on, we developed a base year which models the 2012 existing conditions. And we had enough data in order to calibrate, and it was calibrated to a reasonable level within 5%. Our no-build model essentially is a 2035 condition using a 5.75% vehicle growth rate. And that growth rate came out of a couple of different sources, one of which was DVRPC's travel demand forecasting model. We examined historical counts and growth trends and also under the guidance of PennDOT. And that is a flat growth rate. So it's not per year that was multiplied out. We just went straight to 2035, and 5.75 was a number that we came up with. And like I said, it was a joint effort from our modeling unit and PennDOT.
No, that's 5.75 per year?
No, that's
the total,
That's
the total growth.
So actually, if you were divided by the 23 years from 2012 to 2035, it would be 0.25% per year. But that's not compounded. That's just okay. Got it. So that's total. Okay. For the Build 1 and Build 2, they contain the background growth as well as traffic related improvements, and I'll get into a lot more detail what the Build 1 and Build 2 scenarios are in just a minute. But for the improvements that we did for this particular study, they came from a variety of sources, including the previous studies, the study of Route 30 that I mentioned, and other studies, from our Technical Advisory Committee, which is made up of folks from the Township and PennDOT and Villanova and other people, and as well as field observations. So in the future, the Build 1 and Build 2 scenarios also include Villanova's redevelopment plan. And this was, like Rich mentioned, was based on the sketch plan from May of 2012, which proposed student housing and some limited retail, and we understand a performing arts center, as well as an 1,800 parking space garage on the southeast corner of Ithan and Route 30. And we also understand that these numbers have changed since we undertook our study, and the number of parking spaces has been reduced, as well as the total number of additional parking spaces on Villanova's campus has been reduced. And the trip distribution, essentially what the shift in parking does with you have that large surface lot, which would be reused in terms of student housing and retail. Well, that's going to shift the parking mainly to the structure at the corner of Ithan and Route 30. So with our future turning movement counts for the Build 1 and Build 2 scenarios takes that into account, and it's simply we shifted the demand in the parking via the distribution of trips according to the change in location of the parking. So the Build 1 scenario will focus on the 6-point intersection as well as Villanova Center. First of all, we converted this to a right-in, right-out at the unsignalized entrance to Villanova Center. And because we did that, we all lengthened this left turn lane to accommodate the left turn trips into Villanova Center, because you're no longer able to make a left turn in here. This southbound Spring Mill Road is given a right turn only lane. So it goes from a 2-lane cross-section to a 3-lane cross-section with a right turn only lane at that approach. Aldwyn Lane was removed from the 6-legged intersection, terminating at this location in this parking lot, but it's given access to northbound Sproul Road via a connector street. And this location here would be a stop control intersection. It wouldn't be signalized. And finally, northbound Sproul Road is given a dual left turn lane at that approach to accommodate the additional left turning traffic, both from the future and from the shift off of Aldwyn Lane, coming out here and then making a left, this movement here. So that's given a dual left turn lane. Also for the Build 1, at Church Walk, we introduce a pedestrian overpass, and the traffic signal at Church Walk and Route 30 would only be recalled for vehicles. It wouldn't be recalled for pedestrians anymore. And finally, for the Build 1 at US 30 and Ithan Avenue, there were some, for the additional traffic with the parking garage to be located in this vicinity, we lengthened the left turn lane, the westbound left turn lane on Route 30 to accommodate additional left turning vehicles. We gave the northbound approach at this particular location on Ithan Avenue a protected phase, so you're getting a lead protected left. And also the left turns on US 30 were given more green time. So for the Build 2 scenario, we were asked to do what was called a more context-sensitive improvement. And what this does is it isolates the dual left turn lanes on northbound Sproul Road that I just mentioned. All other improvements were not taken into consideration. It's simply the existing conditions, the existing geometry as you see it today with the dual left turn lanes. So we modeled that particular improvement in isolation, and we have results of that as well. And like I said, here's the graphic here is just all the build 2 scenario consists of is the dual left turn lanes on northbound Sproul Road. So with our networks that we have, the 2012 base year network, the 2035 no build, and the 2035 build 1 and build 2 scenarios, we collected a lot of performance measures with help from the VISM software. And mainly in terms of approach delay, queue lengths, intersection level of service and delay, and we also did some network-wide speed and delay. So all that was enabled us to identify the performance of each particular scenario for the AM and the PM peak hours. The stuff there, just technical stuff. We did a 15-minute warm-up period for each of the scenarios. So we have it's essentially the simulations run for 90 minutes with 15 minutes warm up and then an hour's worth of simulation that we collected performance measures on. And we did 10 random seeds. So we took 10 average simulations instead of just one, so we get a better picture of the variations in traffic that you see from day to day. Okay, so, and I'll show you, I'll go to the simulations real quick here, and I'll run this and give you some explanation. Hello. Where's my button? Okay, I made all the cars yellow because they're easier to see. So. It looks a little strange, but so on the left-hand side, we have the simulation for the PM peak hour, and this is existing conditions or 2012 conditions, just at the start of the PM peak hour. So what we see is the queue building on northbound Sproul Road, the queue southbound Spring Mill Road. Here's Aldwyn Lane with the cars coming at the approach there, and Kenilworth Drive. They just went here. So just to give you a little flavor for how things look today, and then I'll start up on the left-hand, or on the right-hand side. I'll speed this up a little bit. Well, okay. So on the right-hand side over here is the what you would see as a result of the build 1 scenario, which Aldwyn Lane is removed from the six-legged intersection. It's connected at this location via stop control. And you have the dual left turn lanes on northbound Sproul Road. You have the dedicated right turn lane on southbound Spring Mill. And all this with the 2035 growth surcharge, the 5.75% growth in traffic, as well as the additional vehicles as a result of the Villanova's redevelopment plan. So that's just to give you an idea. So you can see the queue here. It's roughly about the same time. Actually, the one on the left is running a little faster, just a few minutes faster. But you can see the backup here, our southbound, is pretty extensive, as we know it is during the PM peak hour. And on the right-hand side here with the dedicated right turn lane, it's significantly reduced. As well, and if we go to keep running this is just in the beginning of the peak hour. As the hour builds, the northbound left turn on Sproul Road, the queue grows significantly more than you see. But on the left-hand side with the dual left turns, it's certainly it's not nearly as lengthy. Okay, so I'll just pause these in case we want to go back to them. Okay, so I boiled all of our performance measures down into one particular table, and there's the performance measure that I want to call out specifically during the PM peak hour, which were the two of the 4 simulations that we were just looking at. This is the base year or existing conditions, level of service E, and this is delay in seconds per vehicle at that particular intersection. I'm taking all of the approaches into account.
That's a combination.
Say again?
That's an average.
Yes, of all the vehicles at the intersection, right. And then for the build 1, this is what we were seeing on the right-hand side of the screen that included all of the improvements that I was talking about for the build 1, including the dual left turn lanes and the southbound right turn only lane. And we see an improvement down to about 48 or roughly 50 seconds per vehicle at level of service D. So essentially, with the build 1 improvements, you have the additional traffic as well as Villanova traffic, and you see a reduction in delay at that particular location. So, and I can answer any questions about this if you want to go back to this. So finally, for our findings and some of our conclusions that we had about the project, we did identify a high number of pedestrians crossing Route 30. That was evident just by our field view and our data collection efforts. And we determined that the overpass at Church Walk would be a benefit to pedestrians in terms of providing them a safe and efficient way to cross Route 30, as well as the folks from the high-speed line getting across Route 30 as well. And potentially, it might have the opportunity to draw students away or folks away from crossing at Ithan if they were given a safer and more convenient way to cross with a pedestrian overpass. We identified a large number of improvements, like I mentioned, from a variety of sources, and most extensive of which are improvements are at the US 30 and 320 intersection. And generally speaking, that the improvements that we identified were able to accommodate the future year growth in traffic, both from just general growth, the background growth rate that I mentioned, and from Villanova's redevelopment plan. There is some decrease in performance at Ithan Avenue just because you have a concentration of the vehicles at that location in the future because of the consolidated parking. But it's not reduced to breakdown conditions. So that was an observation that we found with our software. And finally, we're made aware that there was PennDOT has a coordination plan along Route 30, but it didn't appear to us that the plan was either needed to be retimed or hadn't been implemented. There was not coordination, especially at Church Walk, in either direction for Ithan Avenue in one direction or the 320 intersection on the others. There were times that we saw at the six-legged intersection where the light would be green and there would be no traffic, and other times the queue would be quite extensive. So with proper coordination, we felt that that would also improve traffic flow through the area. So that's all I had. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to
Thank you.
answer them.
I'm sure we do.
Okay.
I have just an initial question about the scope of the overall study. 'Cause
Yes.
I know you're talking to us about our concern area,
Yes.
but did you do similar work all the way down? How far did this go?
What do you mean all the way down?
Because you said the initial studies were they longer?
Well, our particular study
Was
focused on the outside the yellow kind of pickle that you see on the
Sure.
screen. The prior study took a much broader area, but it was more of a top-level study. And so this was like kind of the next step going into this particular location, but looking at it in much greater detail.
And did you take a more detailed approach to any other areas yet?
No, just this. This was just for this particular study. And well, that was even a few years ago prior to that. There was a section down near Haverford Road that I also did a similar type of study, taking a larger corridor study, and then looking at a more refined area, much more detail, at the request of the county. So.
And
Where
then I
Haverford
just had,
runs into Lancaster Avenue, is that right?
I think, yeah, say that again?
Where Haverford Road runs into Lancaster Avenue?
Were Haverford and Lancaster, or was it just on?
Or was it just
Study-
Haverford Road?
When we did the original study, we included a portion of Haverford Road where their retail enterprises are located, east of Marion Golf Club, but not the residential portion. Yeah, and so it's in Ardmore, but it doesn't connect directly to Lancaster Avenue.
Okay, that wasn't a part of that study.
and in the build one, I just want to make sure I have it straight in my
Yes.
head. In the build one scenario, what you've taken there to get your analysis is the 2035 projected increase in traffic.
Yes.
That's going to, the background
Right.
increase.
Yes.
The increase in traffic or the containment of traffic with the Villanova plan as it was presented in 2012.
Yes.
On-the-ground lane improvements and the changes, and also the signalization changes?
Yes. All the above.
And the pedestrian bridge?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I saw that you had pedestrian counts,
Yes.
and that those counts are actual and today.
Say that again?
They're actual and today. They were January 2013.
Right.
Did you run, or is there a way that you can run a human being simulation and plug in the bridge and tell me how many more people are using the bridge?
No. that gets into just human behavioral type of characteristics, which our models don't or wouldn't take into consideration. It's difficult. You can assume that all of the folks crossing at Church Walk now with the at-grade crossing would continue to use that crossing if it were a pedestrian overpass. I think that's kind of a fair baseline. But what we also thought, if with the additional housing right at the other side of the bridge there, that those folks would more than likely use that pedestrian crossing. And it has the potential, like if you're here, if you're coming from the student housing area in this location, and you're going to the west side of the campus, which we saw from our trip distribution efforts, that you can either make your way and cross at Ithan and then make your way through campus, or cross at Church Walk and then make your way through to the west side of the campus. And we felt that if you had a seamless transition to cross Route 30 here with the pedestrian overpass, that it would be easier and likely quicker to make your way up through this neck of the woods and then cross the high-speed line and then make your way onto campus from that. So that's just sort of an intuition or part of our study area that we thought would be reasonable.
Did you have an opinion as to where that pedestrian bridge should be?
Well, yes, at Church Walk.
It's still better there than at Ithan.
Well, yes. It was our findings or conclusions that, for several reasons. One of which, at this particular area, on the far side of the crosswalk, it would be an at-grade, and you'd come in right at the sidewalk level. So you're essentially eliminating a stair or some type of ADA device to get you onto the crossing on one side altogether. And then if you were to examine the feasibility of putting a pedestrian or some type of overpass at Ithan, well, what you have now is folks crossing essentially on all four legs and the two diagonals. So it's a six-way that you could cross. And to put one pedestrian overpass might not accommodate all of the movements desired by the folks crossing. And in addition to that, you would most likely have to go up a set of stairs on one side, cross the bridge, and then down a set of stairs on the other, which would add time to your crossing. And it just seems like it would be more unattractive or undesirable, when the fact that if you came to the intersection and there was no one around, you would most likely just run across the road as opposed to going up a set of stairs, crossing the road, and then coming back down. So it just seems more reasonable or likely or better just to have the one crossing at Church Walk.
I'll stop because other people. I have one last question.
Yes.
If you've seen the proposed, and I know you have Villanova development, on the smaller part of the lot, the front of it, I think, is the theater and the parking is to the rear. If instead the parking was the front structure on Lancaster and the bridge entered at maybe the mid-level of the parking, would that change the utilization rate, do you think?
That's a really difficult question to answer. I don't know. Perhaps, but I guess it would be a function of how many folks are using the garage. And from what I understood, that part of the garage would be used for the students actually living in the new dorms, and their cars would essentially just be sitting there. So I don't know how tall or large the structure would be, but it's a difficult question to answer. I'm not sure.
The other thing to consider, Skip, if you eliminate the bridge at Crosswalk, then all the residents are going to have to cross it at Ethan. But it's not from the garage. Right.
They're going to have to cross
Okay.
Ethan just to get back to the rooms.
I have a couple of background, like basic questions, and then a couple of specific things. I read in the executive summary that you did reference the Performing Arts Center, at least acknowledge that it was a part of this, but I saw very little reference in the anecdote and in the analysis of what you think the traffic and or the pedestrian patterns would be by utilizing that Performing Arts Center. I forget how many seats it's supposed to be, but quite a number. And, you know, it's certainly not going to be, you know, in the peak AM, and it's, you know, maybe potentially people are going to be pulling in for the peak PM, you know, to go to a performance of some sort. But I saw very little reference to the actual impact of the Performing Arts Center itself, and I was curious why that is.
The Performing Arts Center, the actual trips and the demand for the center was not taken into consideration for this.
All right.
It was just the parking.
All right, and then the other thing that I didn't see referenced at all, and you wouldn't necessarily have known this, but the students, you know, the whole premise of this CICD on this location is to get the kids out of the neighborhoods. And there's been a lot of conjecture that that would thereby decrease traffic, except those houses will backfill with traffic, you know, with people. You know, people are going to rent or buy those houses. Mm-hmm. So how did you kind of account for that change, or did you just leave that, in terms of your traffic counts, did you leave that traffic the same?
That it was left the same.
Because you're assuming it'll be replaced.
Yes.
Okay.
And that it's a difficult question to quantify, but so no, those added trips that would be brought about by folks who vacated the residential areas and consolidated onto Villanova's campus, like you said, might be filled up, but that was not specifically accounted for in this study. Okay. And that could be a consideration depending on if you had any type of numbers or data, just how many of the students that populate the dorms came from the residential areas, or whether it's new students or so on. I'm not sure.
And also the no build assumption, the 5.75.
Yes.
I would tell you intuitively that feels very low, very conservative. I'm curious if you have a prior study of this area where prior assumptions about no build growth were made, and were those prior assumptions accurate?
Well, that's a good, were they accurate? Well, the number, the 5.75, again, it came from an examination of our travel demand forecasting unit, essentially our regional model for DVRPC. And it also took into account historical counts and growth trends and patterns and so on. So, and I think maybe it might seem low from my perspective, a planning or engineering perspective, because it's a built-out area. There's not a lot of opportunity for additional employment or housing in existing like today. Obviously, you have developments on the books, but essentially it's a built-out area, so you don't have any large-scale residential areas coming in or so on. So, and in areas like that, the growth rates tend to be fairly flat. And if you were to look at the traffic on US 30 10 years ago and compared to what it is today, you'd probably see very little difference. Not only that, but when you continue to in areas where you do have growth and additional traffic, there becomes almost like a breaking point. Like a Route 30 or any facility can only handle so much traffic before the folks start to find other.
That gets me to one of my other questions,
okay.
actually, because well, I appreciate that you put up the chart that showed the overall, and I said to you, oh, those are the blended intersections, because when you look through the report itself, in fact, northbound 320 greatly benefits from the Build One scenario. Eastbound Lancaster, not so much. So, and in fact, in some of these scenarios, the Build One improvements for the specific flow of traffic actually worsen. And one of the areas that it particularly worsens, and you acknowledge it in the narrative, is Ithan Avenue. Ithan Avenue is going to be pretty profoundly impacted by this, although you might look at the blended, I can't see, the blended intersection, and it doesn't look to be that much worse. My concern would be that, in fact, people will get so fed up with the wait on Ithan, they're going to go the other way on Ithan and start to more greatly impact Conestoga. Mm-hmm. So this question kind of actually is more for Amy, and then I'll let other people ask questions, even though I had 2 pages of questions. Amy, to what extent are you, this is a wealth of information. I mean, it's really, when you really look at the numbers and so thank you, appreciate that. I'd love to see it west of your end for the biomed, all the way to Wayne, because that's a traffic jam that's a parking lot every night. But to what extent, Amy, do you envision utilizing the specific information here to really tweak when we have an applicant coming in, such as Villanova, for which traffic improvements are going to make the most sense for not just Route 30. I mean, your report was focused on improving Route 30. I appreciate that. We have lots of people and neighbors who are also going to care about Ithan Avenue. And I'm just curious, do you envision utilizing this heavily?
The one thing that I thought was really important was the pedestrian Bluetooth that you did, that Mr. Tavani's report actually had that information, and we were questioned pretty frequently about those numbers. And when I did the comparison prior to having your Bluetooth, it was interesting because I came up with the same conclusion that Frank had. And then when you came in with your Bluetooth, I thought that was really good because what it did is it helped support having that pedestrian overpass at the Church Walk location rather than at Ithan. There were a lot of reasons not to put it at Ithan, but it really strongly supported the reason that we think it should be at Church Walk. A lot of the improvements are things that have already been discussed for the Villanova improvements, so we definitely would be looking at some of those for possibly Villanova, depending on how much money would be required for those improvements. But I know that traffic adaptive system that we've been talking about with the biomed and the other, I can't think of it, Villanova Center, I believe it is. The idea is to eventually get an entire traffic adaptive system running west. I agree with you that it would be really good to have not only just this east, but something that runs through the west, and it needs to be coordinated all along that way. And a traffic adaptive system would allow us to build and connect all of those. So the things that he's stating right here are really important to all the improvements along here.
And also the way that they present it as we move forward and do further studies. I found this very easy to understand. I like having both the numbers and the A, B, C, D ratings.
Oh,
I don't like the E ratings, but and I also like the little video. That was fun.
Okay.
But I think it also, for people who don't have a lot of experience with traffic planning, I think that's very useful.
So you did not contemplate the development at Villanova Center. We just had a development come through there.
No,
Okay.
No, this
All
was
right.
like, again, this was a snapshot in time.
No, that's fine. The one final question, did you contemplate, Skip's question about putting the bridge over Ithan Avenue makes all the sense. Did you contemplate what impact could be if we were to lower 30 and do an underpass like they have at 320 in Swarthmore?
No.
Okay.
No.
So do not even
Actually,
look at
that
that.
was, that wasn't suggested during the course of the study. as an alternative or an idea.
Who would have suggested any of these?
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's why it probably wasn't considered.
Okay. All right.
Does that answer your question?
Well, it answers my question that you didn't consider it. You know, maybe mull it in your head for a minute. It could certainly have an impact at that intersection.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It would be
Susan?
it would be an expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had a little bit of discussions, limited discussions on it. My concern with doing it at Ithan is there would be no movements from Lancaster to Ithan, so any of those movements would have to circulate somewhere else in the township to make their access to the campus. So that would be very difficult. You have a lot of lefts going on at that intersection. You'd no longer be able to make a right from Lancaster onto Ithan if you did depression.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
One more question about the overpass.
Yes.
Can you, or would you be able to give us a follow-up conclusion if we said, what if there were 2 overpasses?
In terms of data or numbers or anything like that? Well, the short answer is no. We would need some additional funding to do anything else. That's the bottom line. This study actually ended last June of 2013, and we've been, running through the fall doing other project-related work. And we could. I mean, there's opportunities there. I think to examine King of Prussia Road and that development and any further suggestion to take even a deeper look into some of the work that we've already done. But there would have to be some sort of revenue stream for DVRPC's time and work.
I have a question. The model itself, can it be calibrated for the existing conditions? If we wanted to use this information and we had more specific development data, we were down to a final design, can we actually go out and calibrate in the field your existing model and then the proposed model?
Yes, the answer is yes. And I can go into a lot more detail with that, but within the software, generally speaking, you can set up data collection points at any location in the network. So if you have, it might be easier just to show you really quick. I'm going to stop this. So this is just the structure of the network. Just the pink indicates the connectors and the blue are the roadway or links. And within that, there are data collection points. I don't know if you'll be able to see them, but you can see all of the data collection points within the mess of the intersection. And when you run the simulation, you're able to get the number of vehicles making all movements at the intersection over a defined period of time. If you want it for 15 minutes or an hour, and from that you can match that versus the counted data, and that's what I did in large spreadsheets for all the data. There was hundreds of them, and build across the time, the peak hour, and have just a system in Excel where you have the counted volume versus the simulated volume and the discrepancies between the two, and then making adjustments within the software, either speeds or turning movements or some type of other parameter that you're able to almost make it as realistic as possible. So the answer is yes.
As far as the data that you have, how available is that for others to build upon?
Well, for starters, all of the turning movement counts through all the scenarios are in the appendix of the report. So that's, and we would make available all of our data upon request. For the turning movement counts through our travel monitoring department and all the ATR counts. Actually, a lot of these counts are on our website. So, but the detailed turning movement counts can be made available through a request for DVRPC and so on. So we can, and the PennDOT the condition diagrams are, we can provide those as well and so on. So.
And if we all started driving yellow cars now, would that help, or do we need to wait?
We would all be very visible to other drivers. But
there's 2 comments in the narrative that I had read earlier.
Yes.
Both are on page 12. Because a lot of what we've heard over the last, you wouldn't know this, but we've heard, is that this proposal for Villanova is going to decrease traffic, this is going to be traffic neutral, and yet you have two comments on your page 12 that I'm wondering if you could just give me some context for the two comments. The first comment is, the redevelopment of Villanova's parking lot located on the south side of Route 30 is the key factor for creating the traffic volumes in the Build 1 and Build 2 scenarios. Are you saying, can you tell me what you mean there? Because I take that to mean they are the key source of the traffic increases.
At Ithan Avenue, does it refer to, is it under the?
Well, in the next
Avenue?
paragraph, what it says is that the existing peak hour turning movement volumes to and from the driveways serving the parking lots were identified, and that they will increase by 16% to reflect the overall increase in the parking spaces. Now, you were working on the presumption that they were going from roughly 1,700 to 2,000 parking spaces.
Right,
so is that the key factor then?
Yes.
So then one thing for us to be looking at will be the actual number of parking spaces that will be utilizing Ithan and at Lancaster?
Yeah, at the structured parking, is that what you're referring to?
Well, there's structured parking. They're also putting in some surface parking that you may not have been aware of from that May 2012 sketch. So we should be looking at the total number of parking spaces, because if it's close to this 2,000, then this 16.2% holds. To the extent it's fewer than 2,000, that number would still be an increase, but something less than 16%.
Yes, that's
okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
I had a quick question about the intersection of 320. Does PennDOT have any plans currently to improve that intersection? And if so, do they have right-of-way to do that right turn movement for the southbound?
That's a good point. As far as I know, at the moment, there are no particular plans to do any improvements at that intersection. Let's see here.
I recall from that presentation you did to the Board of Commissioners last week, you were saying you have very little of that right-of-way.
Yeah, so this is just under the aerial, under our networks here. This is southbound Spring Mill, and it comes down the steep hill there, the grade, and that there's a retaining wall right against the sidewalk in this location. And in order to accommodate enough right-of-way for an additional turn lane, removing or going up against or moving back the retaining wall would be very expensive. So the likely alternative to that would be to push the whole right-of-way down to the south on this side, and that might require some of the property at this particular gas station, but all in all, a less expensive alternative with the retaining wall. And according to the signal plan, it does have the right-of-way, and it's literally to the retaining wall. It's the curb, the sidewalk, and that's it. They have very little room to work with on that side of the street.
Do you happen to know on Route 30, in any other locations within this vicinity, is there anything planned?
No. Okay. Not that I know of, no.
What would cause us to be able to get that for this yellow circle to go west of where it is now? Who requests that? How does that happen?
Through the county. I think that the best place to start is through the county. If it's an effort that they're willing to seek funding for through our TIP and to get a study going, I think it would start at the county. And we had actually suggested that maybe there's a meeting that could take place between DVRPC, the county, Radnor Township, and anyone else that might be interested to talk about ways that some of the improvements that I identified in the study could be funded and how they could be funded. So that's an option that DVRPC would be more than willing to do and help with.
Can you give us a sense of what it would cost to extend the study or create a similar study?
I think this particular study was $60,000. I say that, and we blew through that pretty quick. Well, so
is cheap.
I think more in today's, and now that we understand all the work that goes into this, we did the simulations for 4 scenarios for 2 peak hours, and then at one of our meetings, we met with Villanova, and they wanted to do a slightly adjusted scenario, so we did this and that. So I think it would be more in the ballpark of 100,000. That would be an initial guess, depending on the scope.
Let me just tell you how studies occur. We work on a fiscal year basis, and we're currently in fiscal 14, which ends June 30th. The work program for fiscal 15 has already been defined. This fall, we will be developing the fiscal 16 work program. At that time, new studies could be entertained. That's not to say that some kind of traffic study could be requested by PennDOT or whatever, or SEPTA. But you have an opportunity here. You've got a major development occurring at the Villanova campus. You have a major development proposed right around the corner on the other side of the Blue Route interchange. And the meeting that Keith mentioned is something that we might all sit around the table, SEPTA, PennDOT, Radnor Township, and DVRPC, and talk about ways that you can work with the development community and come up with some funds and some improvements that will benefit the entire corridor, rather than waiting till FY16 for us to possibly do another study, which will just be time lost. And you've got more immediate concerns. Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code has Section 209, Act 209, which is transportation impact fees, something that Radnor might look into. There's the Transportation Partnership Act, where private sector people like Bill Rouse, who put the Great Valley Corporate Center, created a district, generated funds from the private sector to fast-track the interchange improvements that occurred on Route 29 and 202, now long since changed. But there's other things out there that ought to be looked at, and we'd be happy to help with that.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. That was a very impressive study, and we appreciate your help and all the fine work you do at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having us.
I should ask, are there any questions from the public? Thank you. Okay. Maybe next time. Next on our agenda is 3032 Garrett Avenue subdivision. Nick, are you taking us through that?
I'll be just a sec here. Yes.
Keith
Hardington, I have a. It's yeah.
It's in the back of the.
Oops.
I do have a quickie. We got something that's coming up on May 2nd down at DVRPC. Is that, these people going to do the same thing?
No, no, it's not.
All right, never mind.
Thank you.
Okay, this is 3032 Garrett Avenue. This property was formerly owned by Spencer Geddes. Mr. Geddes passed away and left it to his issue. What you have currently existing on this property is this twin home, which is 3032, and also currently existing is this existing residence back here. It's a smaller type home that's been in the past used as a rental type unit. we, oh, I'm sorry. Yep. And what happened, because of Mr. Geddes left the property to two different sides of the family. So what we did is we went to court, got a partitioning order that partitioned the property by basically dividing the twin down the middle and giving the existing residence 30B to one side of the twin. Actually, that twin and existing residence will go to Karimu Hamilton, who's seated over there, and this part, the other twin at 32, will go to Alice Downs, who is seated right behind me. So
And
in
Nick, do you
effect,
represent both?
no, I represent Mrs. Downs. Okay. In effect, so what has occurred is that it's just an ownership issue. Nothing is changing. No improvements are being done. Nothing's being demolished. Nothing's being added on. It's just a change of ownership to delineate the ownership as required by the court order for partitioning.
Is there any public comment on this? What was that noise? Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
No.
Okay.
I'm here representing my mother's estate, and the owner 30 and 32, and I just wanted to establish that one posing problem might be that 32 might not be considered a legal dwelling, so I'm just here to ensure that that wasn't going to be an issue with the township, because my intentions with the dwelling is to rent it out. And so I'm just here to present that. Make sure that's not an issue.
Okay. Peter, can you comment on that?
Unfortunately, I heard about half the comments, so I don't feel.
I'm sorry, would you mind coming up? I want to make sure that we cover your concerns.
I think
That's
what
what I
she
thought.
said, Peter,
Yeah,
is
as far as the rear house, that's not an issue here, and whether or not the subdivision occurs is not going to be something that you decide or
Right.
is affected by this subdivision. Either it's a legal dwelling that can be rented out or it's not. I'm sorry, man, but I don't have enough information to tell you specifically at this time, but the fact that it's being subdivided off isn't going to affect that question. Either you can rent it out or you can't rent it out, regardless of this.
In the past, my family has rented it out as a income property to assist in paying for the taxes. And so I just wanted to ensure, and this was also brought up in court, that it was established that the back house was a legal dwelling and that I would be able to rent it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I understand. We are going to make a recommendation about the subdivision, which would have no effect on the legality of the rental property.
Correct.
Okay.
That's something for Kevin Kachansky to determine.
Okay. Any board comment?
I have, the only question I had is that do we have to make any kind of resolution or whatever that we're creating a non-conforming property and it just is what it is?
I think it just is what it is.
Okay.
yeah, of course
did it.
doing.
The court did it.
The court did it, yeah.
Can I get a motion?
A motion that we approve the subdivision?
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our third item on our agenda is an amendment to the Chapter 245 Stormwater Management of our code. I think Steve is going to take us through this.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We've known that there's some tightening up we need to do in our stormwater management ordinance. And in fact, we need to do a rewrite of that. Regina is on our Stormwater Management Advisory Committee, and she's also been a great proponent of doing this. So what we have here are a few changes to the existing ordinance, which we're proposing for short-term. So I'm going to step back to the Board of Commissioners meeting last night just for a moment. We presented these, and they requested that this go to the Planning Commission for recommendation. It's also going to go to the Delaware County Planning Commission for their review. And asked for a proposal from Gannett Fleming to do a rewrite. of our existing stormwater management ordinance. So this would be the short term, and it would, there's some real important changes here. So
this would be an interim step to get some very important changes on the books now.
Correct.
And then we'll be doing the stormwater redo we've all been talking about.
That you are absolutely correct.
Thank you.
So since this happened last night, unfortunately, I gave you my memo to from the Board of Commissioners. I apologize it wasn't changed, but I told them I would hand deliver this to you folks tonight. So in the first one, I'm just going to paraphrase this, and if you want more specifics, Roger can chime in, or you can ask Roger. So the first one is in the narrative portion of the current ordinance, and we're noting the utilization of green infrastructure and low-impact development. Okay, so this, we're now putting that out there. We always push for it, but we're putting that out there in our narrative. More important, and with more teeth, is the second requested change, which falls under groundwater recharge. So if this gets approved, moving forward, we would require applicants to infiltrate 1 inch of rainfall over all surfaces of the entire parcel for parcels exceeding 3.01 acres of gross area. If you're less than that, you revert back to our current ordinance, which is the net 2 year volume approach. So, you know, when we hear folks talk and when you read through things, volume control is important. And this is volume control. So this is saying 1 inch of rainfall over the entire parcel, not just the impervious surface, whatever that square foot area is. And then if you're less than that, basically reverts back to our old ordinance. And the last one, 245-26, you've heard me ask many times here at Planning Commission meetings for applicants to voluntarily partake in, and some do and some don't. And this is for redevelopment sites. The ground cover used in determining existing conditions will be meadow in good condition, whereas our current ordinance, existing conditions are just that. So for 115 Stratford, a lot of the existing conditions were parking lot and building and impervious. So this is also a big leap forward in managing stormwater. So these are the 3 main items we're requesting. And again, I think the chair explained it very well, more or less interim steps while we then move forward on a new ordinance or a very heavily amended ordinance. And in that process, obviously there'll be public comment. Planning Commission's a big part of that. Delaware County Planning Commission, always the Board of Commissioners and the public. And so my request to the Planning Commission tonight, if you're able to, I apologize for giving you the entire stormwater ordinance, but it is strike through where we actually made the changes. So it's only a few sentences. My concern was if I didn't give you the entire ordinance, there'd be no context. You'd just be looking at specific lines on a page. So if it pleases this board, my request is that we would get a recommendation, the good nod from the Planning Commission for this, and I will leave it at that and open it for questions.
Thank you. Board discussion?
Is there a timeline established for the redo of the entire ordinance?
Well, last night we discussed getting a proposal to redo it, and actually this has been heavily discussed at Stormwater Management Advisory Committee, led by Regina. So
he's blaming you for everything, Regina.
No, she's a great impetus. It's been really good. So we would move as quickly along as possible, but there is a specific process, you know, and more on the legal end of what would occur if we do that. My assumption is we will move as quickly as possible to get that rolling. And while we're doing that, this is a good tool to have for us for all the things that are coming down the pike, no pun intended, in the near future.
I did have one question. What does this do to the current projects that are in the pipeline, sketch plans? I don't know that we have any preliminary plans in the pipeline right now, but I think we have a few sketch plans, and they would be subjected to this because sketch doesn't hold vesting, right?
That's correct.
And any conditional use, what happens with those?
The conditional use are grandfathered as soon as it's final.
As soon as what's final?
It's filed, sorry.
Filed.
Yes.
Conditional use is grandfathered, sketch plans are not.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have a question, Steve. Why 3 acres? Why not 2 acres? Or
This is something Roger and I discussed, was also discussed last night at the board, and I think Roger made some real good points here. You know, there's that fine line we have between stifling redevelopment and taking care of our stormwater management. So many of the parcels that you would want to see redeveloped, perhaps in Wayne and other commercial areas, although we want them to do stormwater management, we also want to encourage, you know, new storefronts and the rehabilitation of existing areas. So this allows that, and it also, to be honest, it makes it so that the homeowner who is putting on a deck doesn't have a very onerous stormwater management ordinance to meet, because we do get grading permits. You know, people say, well, how much? Well, somebody comes in for a pool, that can easily go over 1,500 square feet between the pool, the decking, another deck, the widening of the driveway to accommodate. So we're trying to walk a line here where our residents do the right thing and follow stormwater management according to our ordinance, not stifle redevelopment, yet really address some future problems that could occur.
I think one of the confusions, and I've heard this conversation before with regard to, well, decks are above ground, but whatever, patios, is the, on that 22B, 22A2, actually the B, the net 2-year volume approach, the wording is slightly confusing to me in that the addition of 1,500 square feet or more of new or replacement, does that mean net 1,500? I rip up my 500 square foot patio and I put down 1,600. Have I added 1,100 or 1,600?
You've added 1,600. You don't get credit for any removal.
You don't get credit for any removal?
That's correct.
That's the existing ordinance. You get no credit.
Well, but that's not changing in this.
That's correct.
That's correct. That's
Why
not
is
changing
that?
at all.
Okay.
Why is that?
All right.
Why don't you
is-
get credit for what is there if you're replacing something? If a house is
It's-
torn down, or not, let's say if a house is burnt down and you replace the house, any non-conforming properties that were there before stay with that building. So why wouldn't you get credit for the, what was there before?
I believe that scenario is a different scenario than what we're talking about, but if
Well, I
you were-
realize that, but it seems unfair to the homeowner, if you're concerned with the homeowner, that they wouldn't have some credit. And you could maybe limit this to homeowners, that they wouldn't have credit for a patio or something that they're replacing.
Just recognize, Kathy, that is something that's not being changed now. I think maybe we want to look at what's being changed now.
Okay.
And then when the total ordinance is being rewritten, that's certainly something that
Is
should
that
be looked at.
something we could consider?
Yes, certainly,
Okay.
yes.
The other question I have, and forgive me for being late, but I didn't even know we were going to do this tonight because I was at another meeting most of the day. Gee, I forget what I was going to say now. Oh, yes. On the new stormwater fee that you've implemented, is that going to be covered in this at all?
They're two very separate items.
Yeah,
So-
but I know when you rewrite the stormwater management,
That would, my recommendation is that would be paid for out of that stormwater fee. So we have, real quick synopsis on the stormwater fee. There's basically 3 buckets that the money applies, that money would be taken from. One is flood mitigation, one is repair and replacement of existing infrastructure, and one is regulatory compliance through MS4. So the stormwater ordinance would fall between a couple of those, but it seems to me is very well placed to be paid for out of that. That's one of the reasons we did this, is to not just take care of the pipes in the ground, but this stormwater ordinance is to help flooding, and things like this are incremental measures in the future to help those issues.
no, you're not following what I meant, I'm sorry. let's say, for example, you went to your own expense to put in a flood management system on your property, and you were not required to when you did the construction. You just put it in because you thought it was the right thing to do. Will that homeowner get any credit for that system that was
Now
put in?
I understand your question. So right now, that has nothing to do with this ordinance.
I realize that.
That's
Right.
a different ordinance altogether. There is no credit. The Stormwater Management Advisory Committee has been charged with coming up with a credit program within 6 months. So by June, we have to have, or May, we have to have something for the Board of Commissioners. But that's really a whole different
Yeah,
ball of
I
wax.
realize that, but when you said you're rewriting the whole ordinance, and I know that's not what you're talking about tonight, but are those things going to be addressed in the whole ordinance?
Well, a credit for the stormwater fee would not be addressed in this
That-
ordinance.
okay.
It
It's
is
being
addressed in the
addressed
stormwater
elsewhere.
fee ordinance.
Okay. I didn't know you had a stormwater fee ordinance.
There is an ordinance and a resolution that formed the committee, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I watched it last night, Stephen. I know that the timing of this was, boom, get us right to here, and I appreciate that. It seems, what's the word I want to use? Out of order in terms of operationally. For us to be weighing in on this before the Stormwater Advisory Committee, did they weigh in on these particular changes?
Our Stormwater Advisory Committee was prior to, our last meeting was prior to this meeting of the Board of Commissioners. So I had brought this up to the Stormwater in a unofficial fashion and stated, I just want you folks to know that, Friday, this will be on the website. We're going to the board with it. I will email this to all of them for their review and then further discussion at that meeting, at our next meeting, which is the May meeting. But they are one of the pieces, but you and Delaware County Planning Commission are two very big cogs in that gear.
When you set out to draft or redraft an ordinance such as the one that we're looking at, do you follow some model form or protocol that is used generally in creating these types of ordinances? Or do you start from scratch? Anybody?
Most of all these ordinances, when Act 167 came through, we all received sample ordinances. And then each municipality, based on watershed and need and stream types, exceptional value and so on, we all tweaked that. But a lot of these, have very similar items in there. And I don't know that we need to reinvent the wheel when this is done, and I'll defer some of that to our consultant once we get a proposal from them. But I think we need to look at the needs of Radnor and the things we talked about, balance, and how that plays in with what we see as future development.
Well, that leads to my next question, which is in selecting 3 acres for the gross area in that one section, I guess it's 245.22, as opposed to 4 acres or 2 acres. Is that based upon the experience of townships similarly situated to ours? Or what is the source of the information that you base that judgment upon otherwise?
That was purely just a discussion between Steve and I and looking at some of the parcels in the township. And again, going back to the fact that we didn't want to try to capture a lot of homeowners that were doing small improvements on their house and turn what would be a deck or a small addition into a stormwater project with a deck attached to it. So we were trying not to put a hardship on homeowners while still trying to address some of the holes in this code for when it applies to land developments.
And that's one of the items in there, under purpose and explanation. It's in order to more effectively manage stormwater from the development process standpoint. That's what we're aiming for here. Stormwater management from the development process as opposed to what Roger just described, a driveway, a garage, and so forth. Because again, we want our residents to be able to rehab their home or make changes to it, and not so onerous that the stormwater management costs more than the addition.
You know, to follow up on John's question, I'm thinking of all the things we've looked at in the last 3 or 4 years, all these multifamily projects, they're all under 3 acres. Not to pick on any particular developer because I like his work, but, you know, Luella and the florist, you know, the Jardin, they're all under 3 acres.
Well, they wouldn't be exempt, but they would still follow what's on the books today under this scenario.
Which is not bad. Our current ordinance isn't bad. It needs tweaking, it needs adjustment, it needs to be redone. But, I mean, what we have on the books does require developers to manage their stormwater.
And if that's an issue, the acreage, if that's an issue we want to continue to look at, because I noticed it's, you know, it's piqued our interest, how those numbers have been arrived at. That's something we can look at again when we do the overall.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's my concern, Julia. If we do 3 acres now, are we grandfathering people, or can we change that later without any concerns? Let's say we want to drop it to 2 acres for whatever reason that we feel that's
You could
really a
change
good
that
idea.
later, and the only plans that would be grandfathered, as you say, would be ones that would be actually submitted prior to you changing the ordinance again.
How about if we're concerned with the townhouse type development, how about if we say a 3-acre lot that only has 1 house on it? And if it's multiple houses, then it would go into, you know, that sort of would be considered under whatever it is we're going to be doing with this.
I think the main concern here is for commercial redevelopment, for these quick installations.
Well, it's sort of commercial if you're putting, it's not commercial, it's residential technically. But if you're putting 6 houses on a 3-acre lot.
I think the intention of what's happening here is to expedite very strategic pieces that would apply to commercial.
I understand.
So rather than complicate these proposed changes, I think we should stick to them, and you are sticking to them. And I think stick to them in as simple a fashion as possible. And if you just want to come out and say you want to make it 2 acres, that would be easier than to start complicating.
I'd rather not make it 2 acres because there's a lot of, for example, over around Newtown Road, Abrams Lane, there's a lot of properties that might be 10 acres, for example, in the Ardrossan estate. There's a lot of them that would have 1 house on it, and if they add a porch or something, they have to go through stormwater management?
I know that's the part that seems counterintuitive to me, is that, you know, and I appreciate the private homeowner dilemma, which is, you know, you add a relatively small amount of impervious on a 2-acre or a 3-acre lot, and you have to put in a very expensive system, and yet commercial properties, which probably have far more impervious, and by the way, you know, an application we saw last month, you know, they're hitting rock and they're all parking lot, and they're probably going to, you know, not be able to do any stormwater. You know, they won't qualify for this because they're not 3 acres. So there's something inherently counterintuitive to me that we are going to, you know, a larger piece of residential property that probably is not dumping water, you know, and contributing largely to the stormwater problem, is going to have to do something that a smaller property owner, commercial, with a lot of impervious, is not going to have to do. So something about that seems...
Well, Steve, wouldn't it be
Julia,
true?
if I could add one thing...
Maybe that gets addressed in the bigger rewrite.
Well,
I think
if
so.
I could add one thing to this discussion before we go too far. The third item that we're changing, where it takes everything back to Meadow, is the big hammer in this whole change. And what we're discussing now, whether it's 3 acres or 2 acres, the actual net difference in the real world is very little when you're looking at the net change of stormwater between that acreage. When you take everything back to meadow condition, it becomes the big hammer, and that's where you get all of the savings.
I appreciate that, but the retention of an inch over the entire surface of 3 acres of residential property is pretty big as well.
It does not have the same net effect as what the taking everything back to meadow on a redevelopment does.
Okay, so on balance, that's still the more strict change here.
Yes,
How
it
does
is.
this line up? How do these minor changes, and I appreciate, so we don't need to get in the weeds about the big discussion if this is going to get reviewed, but how do these minor changes line up to some of the things that Maya Van Rossum had recommended in her stormwater thing?
Her recommendation, I don't want to speak for Maya, but from what I understood from what was submitted as part of the comments for the CICD, the federal regulations that she referred to was infiltrating 1.8 inches. Now, the regulation that comes from is for newly constructed federal facilities. It's not necessarily an ordinance that would be applied township-wide, but that was an executive order that came out for all new federally constructed facilities.
So I'd like to go through the 4 different changes. The first being utilization of green infrastructure. That I think that's just reiterating something we're already recommending. Secondly, the groundwater recharge. Now, let me pull it up here. Where is it? Well,
It's the 22, 142, 45.
so let's just talk first about the terminology that we're using here. The capturing of 1 inch of rainfall over all surfaces. I think what we actually intend here is over all impervious surfaces, not the entire lot.
No,
I think what this is coming from the PA, my references here, the PA BMP manual from 2006. And in there, let me see. I apologize. You know, I just got this afternoon, so I would have been more prepared if I had a little more time with it. I wasn't at the meeting last week where this was mentioned. So if you look at the volume control guidelines, let's see here. At least the first 1 inch of runoff from new impervious surfaces shall be permanently removed from the runoff flow. Is that where we're getting this from, volume control guideline number 2?
No, actually we're not. This is more stringent than that. We've taken that a step further to where we're doing that same scenario, but not just over the impervious surface, but over all surfaces, taking into account the entire lot size. So if it would be a 10-acre lot, you would be infiltrating 10 acres times 1 inch.
Okay, then I recommend against that. I think that's too restrictive. As much as I want to improve our ordinance, I'm completely against that recommendation there. If it was on the new impervious surfaces or something related back to that, I think I could live with it. But I mean, you're talking about a 100-acre lot is 100 acres times an inch that you're going to infiltrate, and I just think that's crippling the developer. I'm opposed to that one. The next one, let me see here.
I just may add, I think, and again, I'm not going to speak for Maya, but a lot of what she brought forth was based on a federal stormwater management ordinance.
Well, the PA BMP manual comes out of federal regulations, and that's what I'm looking at, the PA BMP manual.
But I think part of when Maya brought hers forth, and I forget the actual numbers, you know, basically you go back X years, determine your rainfall average, and you would do that for, you know, it might be 1.8 inches over that entire surface. So I think that might put a little context to that.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm not familiar with the federal construction guidelines that require that 1.8, but I'm very familiar with the PA BMP manual, which is what most of Chester County is using. I just think that it's just not practical, in my opinion, to say that you need to use 1 inch over the entire site. I just think that that's just not practical at all.
And what's our existing requirement?
It's the net 2-year storm.
Net 2-year storm.
Over the entire.
This formula that you're discussing, and I fully admit that I don't understand it exactly. Is this something that is a standard, or would it be unique to Radnor if we were to adopt what you're proposing?
Which formula are you referring to?
The 1 inch over 1 acre, which I keep hearing that's been
The 1 inch of infiltration.
Yes, over 1 acre. Is that a standard, or is that
I wouldn't say that's
unique?
That's unique. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's unique. I mean, we've tweaked the language a little bit to make it somewhat restrictive, but I wouldn't say that it's unique.
What other townships are requiring this 1 inch over the entire service?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
I don't know of any, so.
You're referring to this part.
Yeah, I am. So what I'm comparing it to is the PABMP manual is for if you disturb more than 1 acre, you have to meet these requirements. And so these are things that are done currently today for larger scale projects. And so if we were to be consistent with those guidelines, I would feel comfortable with that. I don't feel comfortable with going well beyond that, and for good reason. If I have a 3-acre site and you have a 100-acre site, and we have the same amount of impervious cover, you're required to do 33 times what I'm required to do. And to me, that makes no sense.
Say that again.
If your site is 100 acres and minus 3, I have to take 1 inch times 3 acres. You have to take 1 inch times 100. That's regardless of how much impervious cover is on either of the sites.
I mean, that would be expected, I would think.
I know, Regina's saying if they were doing the same project on those two different properties.
To me, it makes no sense to require that. It should be tied to the amount of impervious cover.
But to some extent, I think you have to take into consideration, well, you tell me if you take into consideration the special needs of a township. I mean, are our needs with our stormwater issues more grievous than a township further out in Chester County, or it's less developed?
I don't know if I can compare townships to townships, but you obviously have a serious stormwater control issue in this township, and that's reflected by the actions that have been taken by the Board of Commissioners to institute this fee. So this is one way of addressing future issues with stormwater so that we don't create more of a problem than what we have now.
So let's look at a scenario. The existing parking lot over by the baseball field is going to be expanded by a certain amount. Does that mean this entire property here, you have to take that and 1 inch of rainfall and infiltrate all of that for this entire site because you're adding, I don't know, is it 20 parking spots?
Potentially.
See, that's what I have a problem with. I would recommend for impervious surfaces. I would recommend against the entire surface. I feel very strongly about that.
But you mean all the impervious, not just the improvement?
That would be in the direction either way, either new or total. I would be okay with either of those. I'm not okay with the entire surface.
Well, how could we? I don't know how we can judge this now.
No, we don't have to write it. We just have to give our opinion about what we're seeing here. And for instance, if we agree with Regina, which I do, we would want to say we don't approve of that. We're not going to write the ordinance.
Well, the problem is I see it, Julia, and again, I may be, the class moves as fast as the slowest student, and I may be the slowest student here, but we have a problem in this township with stormwater management. And while this may be, I won't use this as my own term, but it might be overly restrictive, it may have to be that restrictive in order to solve the problem. I mean, if all we're going to do,
it may be, but I really think
if we make it less restrictive, are we just putting a Band-Aid on the problem? I don't see how for us to recommend this or not recommend it means that we have made a value judgment as to whether or not this is a sufficient solution to the stormwater management problem that we have here in this township. I don't see how we can do that based on, I respect what Regina is saying because she has far more knowledge than I have, but we also have people sitting over here who are very knowledgeable and have decided that this is a sensible thing to do. So that's why I'm questioning how can we make a value judgment with the knowledge base that we presently have.
I have a quick question. When you were looking at the amount of properties in the township that had over 3 acres, what percentage, just a ballpark, were residential?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I
so-
can tell you the third ward has a large, 3-1 has a large number of large properties with one house on it, and they're deed restricted. So they are not going to build a development on there. And they might add a porch, but they have 10 acres, or they have 3 or 4 acres. In the fourth ward, there's also a lot of those. And I think you're putting a ridiculous burden on those property owners because they're adding to taking the water out of the system because they have such a large open property because of the no building on the balance of the property. Why should they be further penalized because they want to add something onto their property or onto their house?
Can I ask a question here? I mean, to me, the issue here, we're talking about the stormwater runoff is going to come off of Meadow. Is that correct? Yeah. So if you have, for example,
Not necessarily.
Educate me. We're talking about we're turning it to Meadow condition, and you have to cover the entire thing. Is that correct? Well, I'm not.
We're not turning anything into Meadow. What we're doing is when you do your pre-development calculations, you use permeability factors that assume that the property is meadow and not impervious.
Okay. All right. Then if you had a 10-acre piece of property with a single house on it, assume that 95% of that is not going to be covered by house or most of that's going to just be empty, land. So the net effect is going to be the amount of water that's going to have to run off that you're going to have to deal with is really going to be only, increased slightly because of the impervious piece of it. Is that, or am I misunderstanding the situation?
I'm not sure that I fully understand your scenario there. I apologize.
Roger, I have a question. In trying to objectively understand how restrictive this change is in comparison to the 2-year flow rate, which is our current standard, do you have a way to quantify that, if we had a piece of property that is the 3 acres and the 1,500 square feet, so do we have a way of quantifying the difference in what we're asking them to hold on?
I did a worksheet for several different zoning districts, and I apologize I don't have that with me tonight. I could forward that information to you.
I think that's kind of what some people are struggling with is the context of just how restrictive, is this.
If I can add, though,
Sure.
some of the concerns that everyone's having about this is going to create a hardship for certain homeowners that want to put a back porch on or a pool or something. This, like every other ordinance in the township, would be subject to a waiver if the homeowner would come in and would attempt to prove hardship. The Board of Commissioners can give relief, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, they can give relief to sections of this ordinance if it would be deemed it would be creating a hardship.
But I think at least I'm sensing a degree of urgency that we need to do something now that is totally changeable. And I agree with Regina's point as well. I'm not totally comfortable with all of it, but I think it requires a lot more detail and study. And personally, I'm comfortable with passing something as a stopgap now. Let them go do the study. It's going to come before us again. We'll get our chance to dig into the weeds on this thing. And if someone has something that they come forth with right away that is going to be overly restrictive, we can advise them that we're rewriting the ordinance, and why don't they wait 6 months and then, give it a shot again, or come through with a special exception or variance or whatever the case may be is.
Just one comment.
The other thing to point out here also is that the exemptions under the current ordinance would still apply here. So there's exemptions under the current ordinance that you have to be creating 1,500 or more square feet of impervious surface. You have to be disturbing 5,000 square feet of earth. If you're under those, you're not complying. You don't have to come into compliance.
I am agreeing with Regina a little bit because I'm looking at this and saying, what if it's a 10-acre parcel with 7 acres of parking? I mean, suddenly you have an incredible retention issue. And you are balancing the stormwater problem, which I recognize the township has, on individual development as it occurs disproportionately.
I just ran a couple of numbers as I was sitting here looking at like how much 1 inch of rain over an acre, 3 acres to acres. I mean, the volume is phenomenal. And just for the basic stormwater design that I do on a somewhat daily basis, I mean, like I know how big just a stormwater pit is for 500 square feet, and now we're trying to gather that. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the number. I just don't know how they capture all of that without almost like putting in a stormwater system that you would use for a development of a commercial site, like major underground. You'd have to dig up half the yard just to put it in. I mean, that's just my comment. I mean, I understand your point. I understand both points.
I would like to take us in a slightly different direction here. As he said, it seems to be there's some considerable urgency about this thing. And my question would be, they passed a week ago the CIDC, and what we noticed in there was you were grandfathered if you had 90% of the then existing impervious coverage. You had that, so that basically whatever runoff you had there, if you reduced it to 90% of that, you could continue to discharge that off that piece of property. If we pass this ordinance in this way, and then this has actually been signed before Villanova or anybody else comes in with a development plan under that, they would have to meet this, would they not?
That is correct.
Villanova is not going to be subject to this.
Why?
They will.
I thought that they already put in their conditional, they haven't put in their conditional use application yet.
No, there's been nothing submitted from Villanova at this time.
So I would be comfortable with, on that one particular issue, rather than stating all surfaces, it would either read all impervious surfaces or all new impervious surfaces. New is less restrictive, all impervious surfaces is more restrictive. Either of those two would be acceptable to me, and Elizabeth, would you weigh in on whether or not you would prefer new or all impervious surfaces in that? Because even if you look at the formulas below, the calculation is for impervious area. It's clearly intended to be for impervious area. If you look below.
Our stormwater, as I kind of feel, is we already do new impervious once you get, I mean, that's the whole reason for most of the stormwater is built off of the new impervious surface. So if we want to be more restrictive, we would say all of your impervious is now part of that.
Would you feel like that's a livable?
I can see for.
Because if you concur that you feel that that's livable, I would recommend that.
I would say that's until we kind of figure out how this is going to affect people and businesses, then that is a little bit more of a breathing room for some people who have larger properties who are trying to maintain them, but also make them viable for selling them. I mean, how are you going to sell a 10-acre property if someone knows they've got to do that to it?
Right.
I mean, that's just a killer. So, then you're looking at subdivisions, and then you're looking at things we're trying not to do in the township. And so I think, that's a little more restrictive. And again, we are talking 1,500 square feet before this kicks in, from what I understand. So, as it is when we hit 1,500, we already have to go into a bigger stormwater, not just the dry wells. Now we're into the piping underground and certain storage of certain years of the storm. I think that if we want to be a little more restrictive, then we would say impervious on the site. But again, I would say even when this whole thing is rewritten, I'd want to look at that again. But that's kind of where I draw the line at this point.
I couldn't recommend anything more than the impervious. Does anyone have any questions particularly as to, like, what is it that we're saying here? Because it is pretty complicated. And
I got it. Well, I'm ready for you to make a motion anytime.
Hang on a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have one last question. Peter or Roger, walk me through, just quickly, the time frame of when the total review of this would happen. Because to Steve's point, if we pass something now and err on the side of, caution, what have you, and this is getting revisited in, a month, 2 months, what have you, we're going to see it's either too restrictive or it's not. People are either going to come in and make application or they won't. They'll come in and ask for a waiver or they won't. And if this is a relatively short time frame that we are putting these measures in as we are also reviewing it, is it a pretty parallel track this is on?
I would assume that the overall rewrite would probably take at least several months. It would go back and forth through the different committees and probably be in front of this board a couple of times, Steve.
Right. I mean, because just this process we're doing now, this roundtable discussion of the ordinance, so then, the Planning Commission will make recommendations. It may go back to the board, then back to the Planning Commission, just like other projects we've done. Plus, we'll have the county's input and as well as resident input. So, depending how that goes, I think 6 months is very fair. Looking at meeting dates, it's not like we get the line meetings up right in a row. So, what you may look at, in June, you would make changes to it, goes to the board, comes back to you in July, and onward and onward. So, I think that would be pretty fair, plus public comment on that, whether it be at this meeting or at a board meeting, and then incorporating them and then coming up with something that really fits the bill for all. I was just asking Peter, if we made that one change, I think this is still going to come back to you. If we made the change of rainfall over all impervious or new impervious, I mean, one of the things we are trying to be more stringent here, there's no doubt. I mean, that's part of what we're trying to do. I don't know if we make that change and it goes to the board on the 28th, which I would like to do, it may have to come back down to you again. I just don't know. I need to talk to John Rice.
I think if they accept the changes that we recommend, it doesn't have to come back to us.
I would strongly recommend that we leave it as is. I think we have a bigger fear and concern about the commercial developments coming in and stopping that process than we do about some residential person which we don't know anybody's coming forth, and they have alternatives, plus we still have another bite at the apple to rewrite this thing to get in the way we want it. I think that's our bigger fear.
I understand your concern, and I understand the timeline, but I also understand that if we make recommendations to them and they accept those recommendations, they're not required to come back to us. They're allowed to incorporate minor changes without.
Yeah, but they're rewriting the code, which comes back to us.
The way I feel about this, there's no way it's an absurd proposal, in my opinion.
Do you not believe it's coming back?
No, I would say that if we were to require what we're writing here, it's completely impossible, and it would make us look ridiculous.
And it probably wouldn't be, it would
And it wouldn't be
probably
enforceable.
wouldn't hold up in court.
And it wouldn't,
Yeah.
so they would basically get nothing out of it, because they would just throw that out. They would say that's a ridiculous requirement.
Who's they?
Any court that it was challenged in.
Peter?
Because there's no standing for that anywhere.
Peter? Is
No, I don't think
Regina's
it's
claim-
an automatic disqualification in a court, no.
Nowhere else have I seen this required.
This would be a substantial change in the language. This is not some minor correction. You're making, and that's why you're having this argument, because it would be a substantial change into the ordinance, changing it from all surfaces to all impervious surfaces, or to all new impervious surfaces. That is the core of this amendment, and you're making a change to that core. So, my concern is that it would have to, and I'd be more concerned that if it was adopted without coming back to you, that it would be more likely to be overturned on a procedural issue than on the merits of whether or not we have the right to look at the entire property for control rather than the amount of impervious surface on that property.
Would it be
on that issue, on that particular issue, does it have to be would the court have to determine that it amounts to a taking, unlawful taking, because it's so restrictive? Would it have to go that far?
That could be one thing. That could be one way to try to attack it. Really, what it is, it would be more of an application of does the prohibition or the regulation reasonably relate to the harm it's trying to control? That's really the ultimate question.
Question, could we make a recommendation that it be approved as written, and then as an addendum to that, make the suggestion that they evaluate what they're talking about?
Yes.
We can make that motion to do that.
Yes.
Then I make a motion to do just that we pass this, recommend that we pass it as it stands with the suggestion that they review this one section dealing with changing that from all property to merely all impervious.
And so are you suggesting that so that people like Villanova will apply in this time period and then change it after they don't apply, after their application's in? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying I want to pass this in its current form so that it becomes the ordinance that Villanova has to come in and comply with. If they have an issue with that, they can ask for a variance or,
Or they just wait until it comes back to us?
Because
how's that not spot zoning?
They might come very, very quickly.
Seems like we're making
Doug,
a recommendation.
I wouldn't
that they-
actually support that. And I also have some issues with some of the other items that I haven't actually had an opportunity to discuss yet. So I would actually not support that motion. Make their decision. But I have some issues also with the meadow in good condition. Again, I feel that's extremely restrictive. I think in the, again, to PA BMP manual, which is an accepted practice, they require that you consider 20% of the existing impervious area as good condition meadow in good condition. And if you wanted to be more restrictive, I would recommend 25%. Because we do have stormwater issues, we have a stormwater fee in this township. I think it's justified to increase that to 25%. However, not putting a percentage on that, I feel, again, is far too restrictive for my comfort level. Knowing what that actually physically requires, the amount of volume and is just beyond what I feel comfortable with. I think in this township, we want responsible development. We don't want zero development. I think we want redevelopment of commercial sites to occur, because if people find it so restrictive that they don't want to redevelop our sites, then we don't get that 25%. If we put it at, if we don't cap it.
There are other townships that use the meadow. So the way this is written, if I may, the ground cover used in determining the existing conditions flow rates for the developed portion of the site. So I'll use 115 Stratford Avenue. So a certain portion of that site was considered woods, whatever, forest in X condition. What the meadow would apply to was what was parking lot and building, which was all impervious. So when you're doing your base calculation, okay, there's a big delta there. Roger's right. There's some teeth here now. Because when you're doing your existing conditions flow calculations, you're basing it on impervious surface. So there's not as big a change on the post-stormwater management. But when you take that back to meadow, which some ordinances do, not via percentage, but on the whole. So if you were a property owner and you came in with a property with varying types of surface on them, so there could be some existing meadow, there could be, forest in X condition, and we have requirements of how that's determined based on the caliper of the trees and the health of the trees. If there was parking lot or an existing house or the combination of that, that goes back to meadow. So when you're doing your existing conditions start, you're using a much more stringent one. And I understand and respect Regina's thought on that, but I'm the one who's been pushing for the meadow as we go back. It would have made a difference. It makes a big difference. Can it be onerous? Perhaps, but again, there's waivers, there's hardship, but we are trying to address a problem we have here. I mean, the Board of Commissioners passed an ordinance where we are getting a fee from everyone in the township to address stormwater. There's no doubt we have serious stormwater issues. And again, this is if you want to call it a stopgap or a short-term measure, there's no doubt about that. But we are trying to get more stringent. And if you look at the federal guidelines that Maya Van Rossum presented one night, this is actually the 3.01 acre issue is actually less. And I understand and respect Regina's opinion a great deal on the meadow. I'm just chiming in with my concern on that. I think it's an important issue. We are a developed township, so redevelopment is a lot of what will happen, right? There's not a lot of big open space that's going to get done. There's infill, and I think on the short term, some of these address it. I mean, I will gladly make whatever changes this commission wishes to make or doesn't wish to make. I will take back to the board on the 28th, and I'll talk to the solicitor at that time to determine if it needs to come back to you folks. Whatever you recommend tonight, if there are changes, that's what I'll send to Delaware County Planning Commission.
Yeah, Regina, I mean, a lot of your points I do agree with, but I don't really feel comfortable just picking these 3 or 4 things and making modifications to them without seeing the rewrite of the whole ordinance. So this, to me, is more of a procedural thing. So I'm happy for you to make a recommendation, and then we'll see how everybody else feels. But because I just don't want to pick these 4 things and rewrite these without a lot more study and without a lot more information. So I'm not comfortable doing that.
But we are talking about 4 things.
I know, but we're going to rewrite a whole ordinance, which is going to have other things that are interrelated with those 4 things. I would like to see it all as one package,
so
one body of work.
Are you saying that you don't support these in any way, shape, or form?
No. I support passage. I support dealing with this all at once as one body of work. What we're doing now, what the township has requested that we do, is we tackle these 4 sensitive things to protect ourselves and then come back and rewrite the whole ordinance. I'd rather just spend all this time in depth looking at the whole ordinance as one interconnected body of work versus picking these 4 things that the township was very concerned about right now. So, and let's just make a recommendation and see where people.
I guess my recommendation would be to modify the one
Can you make that a
change.
motion?
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
Please.
I would like to make a motion.
There's already a motion
Have a
on the
motion
floor.
on the table.
Yeah.
Did anyone want to second Doug's motion?
My motion was to pass this as it stands and then have a suggestion that this specific feature be reconsidered by the board.
I would like, I'm not sure what the correct procedure is, but I would modify that. So do we have to first consider Doug? Well, I'll shut up.
First somebody has to, what do we?
Mr. Lord, what you can do is you can make a suggestion to Mr. Cohn about amending his motion. Ask if Mr. Cohn wishes to amend the motion. He can then amend the motion, and then you can ask for a second of that amended motion.
What I was going to suggest is, and maybe this is what you're saying, and I didn't understand it. We could approve the changes as written, as suggested by Steve, and then have a second motion, which would be your motion, in which we recommend that the panel or that the Board of Commissioners consider Regina's concerns, and she can voice those concerns in a motion.
I guess what I'm thinking is that we're only making a recommendation in any way, shape, or form. We don't approve or disapprove. Right. So I cannot recommend incorporating these as they stand. So that's why I'm discussing them with you. So that's where
And if she's on the board of doing some of this stuff, I'm sure she's got some pretty good
Okay, now Doug has made a motion, and John has recommended a modification.
Then I will amend the motion by withdrawing this portion about making a suggestion or recommendation. We'll let somebody else make that. I revise the motion so that it reads, approve this as it stands. Made a recommendation that it be approved as it stands.
Does someone want to second that?
I'll
motion?
second that.
Can I see a show of hands? All those in favor? 4 in favor, opposed? Okay, that goes down. Would someone else like to make a motion?
I would recommend revising the amendments to amend. The first amendment I would like to do is to add impervious to the amount to it's. I'm sorry, I don't have the whole thing. It's A, section A. I didn't print out the whole thing.
So
you want the right
if I
number?
could, Regina, if it would read like this.
Okay.
Retention volume.
In
captured-
24, 20, I'm sorry, 224522, A, add impervious before
That would be
surfaces.
A2A.
Yeah, A2A, sorry.
So that's going to read retention infiltration volume to capture 1 inch of rainfall over strike-through surfaces, strike-through.
Keep everything. You just add all, between all and surfaces, add impervious. Yeah. The second recommendation that I would like to make is to modify the, sorry, I don't have the numbers. Give me the numbers.
245, 26C2.
Okay. 245, 26C2, to read flow rates for 25% of the developed portion. Everybody follow that? And the reason for that being, it is.
You don't have to give the reason.
Is
in the motion?
An improvement over our existing.
Anything else? No. Okay. Is there a second for that motion? Elizabeth, second. Show of hands, please. All those in favor? 5 in favor, opposed? 4 opposed. Thank you. The motion carries. Does anyone want to make further recommendations to the commissioners on this issue?
I recommend that we have some education for both us and the Board of Commissioners
And the
to
public.
understand the technical issues, because it's very hard to weigh in on things when you don't understand the technical side.
The technical side of it. So as we move forward with all the work we're going to be doing on the stormwater, we're going to need a little bit
We're
more
gonna need
education.
some more.
Yeah.
Is that a motion?
I don't think we need a motion. We're just-
Recommendation.
We'll send a memo. Send a memo.
I'd like to thank the commission very much. So what we'll do, the Delaware County Planning Commission gets what was talked about last night. Because that was what it was approved to send to Delaware County Planning Commission. I will amend this, again, with strike-through, and it'll be back hopefully on the board's agenda for April 28th. And we're also, we're going to have the Stormwater Management Advisory Committee folks there, so it should be a very stormwater-type meeting.
Thank you, Steve.
If you're
Thank you very much. Is there any old business?
I didn't quite hear, is that the board that on the 28th is going to consider this with the Stormwater Management Subcommittee present? Is that what I just heard?
Steve?
Mr. Lord, I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry, did you say that on April the 28th, the board is going to consider these amendments, and that the Stormwater Management Subcommittee is going to be there?
We've been trying to work at the Stormwater Management Advisory Committee.
Yeah, that's it.
To have at least one member present to the board, just an update of where we stand and what we've done to this date. I'm shooting for the 28th, but I really don't know. I mean, I make that request for the agenda. This, I don't think we'll have a problem getting back on the agenda. We will send it as, after speaking to Peter, what was approved, what was authorized by the Board of Commissioners was what you have in front of you. So that will have to go to Delaware County Planning Commission. But these recommendations, basically the two edits will be sent to I will provide that to the Board of Commissioners on the 28th.
Okay.
I have a
think
question.
if I answered your question. I'm not sure.
Can I ask you? What happened to Biomed tonight?
Oh, they asked for continuance.
They did, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I believe Mr. Lord had a old business that he wanted to bring up.
I had an issue regarding the must ordinance and the Biomed project as right, but I think and what it was is I'm concerned about the apartment complex and its effect on the school district with new kids coming in, and I'm also concerned that we don't have an accurate picture as to exactly what the applicant owns, how many acres. There's indications that it's not 26 acres or 26.4 acres, whatever, that it's less. And I was going to make a motion regarding that, and I decided that it probably wouldn't be fair to do that in the absence of the applicant.
Actually, I have a question, if I could ask. Who determines what they own? Since they say they own it, Brandywine says they don't. And it looks like it was...
Hold on. This is an extremely controversial matter. I think it's really inappropriate to bring it up now when it's not been on our agenda. There's going to be several parties who are going to be very angry. We have a discussion that they're not a party to. So I think we need to hold these questions until this comes back with all the parties, with Brandywine, with Biomed, with all the residents, and let's answer those questions at that point in time, not now. I think we should not. No,
I understand that. I'm not asking you
it.
to make a decision. I'm saying, what's the procedure?
They have to present us with evidence.
They have to. Okay.
Yes.
I do have a question about this. When you send this to the Delaware County Planning Commission, it's going to be just what the Board of Commissioners said. Will there be any mention in what you send to them of the things that Regina we just passed?
I mean, the board authorized me to send what was in front of them last night. I don't know if I can make those changes. I'll talk to Peter offline or John. I think I have to send what was authorized. They said send this to Planning Commission.
That's
I can't
fine.
make any changes based on that. The Board of Commissioners will know your changes that were voted in tonight, and they can make a decision based on Delaware County Planning Commission comments, your comments, and so forth, and public.
You just answered my question. Thank you.
Make a motion, we adjourn for the evening?
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.